Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series. I'm your speaker, Casey, and today I bring you something slightly different. When researching the definition of infiltration, Google offers the following: the action of entering or gaining access to an organization or place surreptitiously, especially in order to acquire secret information or cause damage. Infiltrating cults and high-demand groups may seem like a risky and potentially dangerous move for an individual to make. But for Lisa Van Arnsdale, this is her bread and butter. Willingly entering the doors of known destructive groups, Lisa integrates herself into these communities for prolonged periods of time, learning the ways in which these worlds work and reporting back through blog posts and journalism. Although Lisa has had success with her investigating, with little pushback or threats, this is not a hobby that I would recommend to others. Instead, let us live vicariously through Lisa's own experiences and stories as told in this 3-part series. Part 1 focuses on Lisa herself and how she found an interest in cults and high control groups, with Part 2 and 3 focusing on experiences Lisa has had inside specific groups that are widely considered to be cults. For early access to ad-free full-length episodes, please go to patreon.com/thecultvault to support the show, or follow the links in the episode description. Now, here is Lisa. So hello, Lisa, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat with me today and bring a slightly different format to the show, talking about various groups that you have personally visited and spent time with. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. Hello, listeners. I'm Lisa Van Arsdale from Pennsylvania in the United States, and I am beyond thrilled to be here talking to Casey today. So buckle up, everybody.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey through life that led you to where you are now?
Totally. So currently I live in Pennsylvania, and for those who don't know, that is an area in the northeast of the United States that was founded with the intention of having religious freedom. So a lot of weird religious groups that didn't know how to act in Europe came over here to like start with clean slates and everything. So I grew up with like the Moravians and the Quakers and the Amish and everything. They're all things that I grew up around. Currently, and I drive a bright pink Subaru, which I'm sitting in right now. It takes me to all of the cults that I go to visit. And I'm also a stand-up comedian. So that's who I am.
Oh my goodness. How does somebody find themselves in the line of work or as a hobby doing stand-up comedy?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Casey. I was voted class clown in high school without any effort to be voted on my own. And through a series of strange events, I used to live in New York City. I spent a lot of time with some semi well-known stand-up comedians and was constantly being asked if I was one because I was always hanging out with them, and I got sick of being asked that question. So I decided to give it a try. It's very much a hobby for me. It's not a really a professional pursuit. I occasionally get paid to do things, but it's mostly just a creative outlet. And I mention it because it'll be relevant with another question that you're going to ask me.
I think it must take a lot of guts and confidence and bravery to be a stand-up comedian. Not only do you have the pressure to make people laugh, but you also have to kind of have somewhat of a thick exterior if people are going to say that you're not funny.
Yeah, it's a loaded situation. The first time I did it, I probably cried for like 3 days leading up to it. It was very dramatic. I think a lot of people who try comedy are people who are like very, very desperate for human connection. And it's easier for them to like have the arm's length distance of I'm on stage having a one-sided conversation and you're going to either validate me with your laughter or not, than it is for them to go out and get what they actually need, which could be a therapist or a genuine conversation with someone or a hug. Uh, so it is not without its more grating situations, because it is a lot of very unhealthy people who pursue
I
it.
feel as
So,
if I feel as though if you were to visit some known cultic environments, you would need to take that same level of bravery and guts along with you as well, knowing some of the things that you might be walking into. So how did you find yourself interested in the subject of cults?
well, okay. So my dad grew up Catholic. Um, and you know, from having had Amanda Montell on the show, I haven't listened to that episode yet, but I've read her book and she is just the bee's knees. She talks about how like you can't truly like label a group a cult because it's an inherently pejorative term, but you can check off the boxes and be like, well, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck. So my dad grew up Catholic, and we know that they check quite a few of the culty boxes. And my mom grew up Seventh day Adventist, and it has been a real blessing for me to listen to your show where you interview other Adventist survivors. And so we know that they check quite a few boxes. So my parents got together, and my dad was like, I can't really be bothered with the God thing, to be honest. And my mom was like, I don't want to give up. So they decided to raise us in like Protestant evangelical Christianity. They thought that that would be a more well adjusted upbringing than what they had, respectfully. And that was not without its issues either. So I grew up in evangelical Christianity. Um, I can think of very few exceptions of people I grew up with in those communities who did not vote for Trump, and are not like drinking that particular brand of Kool-Aid, unfortunately. So between my parents' upbringings and my upbringing and like purity culture, I don't know if that's a thing that has happened in England. If you want to have me back another time, we can go on a whole tirade about purity culture. Um, but by the time I was an adult, I was like, okay, I want to have a relationship with, you know, whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, higher power, source, what have you. But I want it to be between me and that entity and not any sort of organized anything. I want it to be personal. And so that's like, I went from being like a very, very good Christian girl to like, we're going to keep this small and we're going to keep it personal and we're going to keep it filled with integrity. Um, and I took a class in college, and this is where I get excited, on Caribbean religion. I had a fascination with Rastafari, and that's why I took the class. But I always say I came for the Rastafari and I stayed for the voodoo, because before we learned about anything, we learned about Yoruba, which, and I'm like a total white lady who's going to try her best here, but I should not be considered the authority on this subject at all. But my understanding of things is that Yoruba is the cultural like tradition and spirituality and everything of the Yoruba tribe, which is in West Africa, uh, which like we now think of as Nigeria. And these are the people who were brought to the United States on slave ships. And when they got to places like Haiti, there were these ridiculous rules where the slave owners were like, we're going to justify what we're doing to these people by turning them into Christians within 9 days of arriving here. And that's going to make it okay for us to do terrible things to them. So they'd be like, hey, slaves, so we're going to make you Christians. You're welcome. This is Jesus. This is Mary. This is Saint, whoever. And the enslaved people were like, oh, we know about them. we know about those people, but we call them X, Y, and Z. And the slave owners were like, no, call them Jesus and Mary and Saint whoever, damn it. Now go pick cotton. And the enslaved people were like, if you want, wink, wink, we'll call them that. And so things like voodoo and Santeria and Obia were born out of a syncretism of Catholicism and the like traditional Yoruba. And that's why, like, if you go into a Botanica, you can buy figures of like Catholic statuettes and things. But I thought that that was just the most compelling thing ever to know that like these spirits are manifesting themselves to different people groups in different parts of the world and having different names, but that the general spirit of things, the general characteristics are still there. And my metaphor that I've come up for it with is that like if I'm in the grocery store with my mom, I call my mom mom. That's her name to me. If some lady that she knows from out in the community comes up and is like, hey, Diane. And I'm like, no, her name is mom. Call her mom. Um, and then some kid that she used to teach in school comes up and is like, oh, hey, Mrs. Van Arsdale. Like, we're all addressing her by the name that she gave us to call her. So, like, we're all right. Like, none of us are wrong. But whoever's the most obnoxious and screams the loudest is going to like win. And then we're all going to call her mom or whatever we're calling her. But I just thought that it was so fascinating that these spirits are manifesting themselves in different capacities with different names in different parts of the world. And there's just so many similarities between different religious traditions. And I think that's really fascinating stuff. And I'll stop rambling in response to that question now.
So, after you learned about the Yoruba community and how it developed and changed after people went over to evangelize, to
Mm-hmm.
proselytize, how does that link to your decision to go and visit with certain cultic groups?
Well, it just like opened Pandora's box of curiosity inside me. Like, if this is the origin of these things, what else is there to learn? What else can people have in common? What else can unite people and can they agree on? Like, what other goodness can we find? And I'm also just like a people loving, genuinely curious person in general who is always like up for some bullshit and always up for an adventure, and visiting cults is just like handpicked for me. It's perfect.
So, what was the first group that you visited, and when did you make the decision to actually go in person as opposed to just using books and the internet and other more
Sure.
traditional sources that people might use if they wanted to really understand a group?
Yeah, so I think this is a tough one for me to answer, and I was thinking about it ahead of time. There had been a lot of um more conventional visits for me. Like I had like visited lots of cathedrals and things on trips to Europe and stuff. I'd studied abroad in India where I visited a Sikh temple and the Lotus temple and Hindu temples and all of that stuff. Um, but I think the first one where I was like genuinely going for the sake of it and like to actually interact with the people, I was 23. It would have been almost 10 years ago. And I went to visit the Nyabingi tribe of Rastas in Jamaica. I was already in Jamaica and they were like relatively close. and you have to dress a certain way, and you have to plan your menstrual cycle around visiting them because you have to be at a certain point in your menstrual cycle for them to let you in. Um, your face.
So this is all stuff that you knew before you decided to make the trip
Yeah.
to visit.
Yeah, that I had known from taking the class. Um, and so yeah, I like grabbed my floor length skirt and my long sleeves and my head wrap and checked the calendar and was off to visit the Nyabingi. um,
So do
yeah,
they want you to be menstruating or ovulating?
they want you to be at like a point, like, would that be ovulating when you're like the exact opposite of your period?
Like when you're like most ripe for pregnancy or fertility, like you're
Yeah.
most, yeah.
Yeah, like the goal isn't to be like ripe for the harvesting per se, but like they want you to be not about to start your period and not just getting over it either.
Do you know the reasons for that?
Um, there's like Old Testament basis for it, like just being unclean and everything, like that sort of thing. There's definitely stuff in the Old Testament about like send the women away to hang out with themselves while they're on the rag type
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I don't think that's necessarily unusual in terms of a lot of more fringe Christian groups,
Yeah.
especially when you circle back to purity culture and scripture. So I guess now I'm just going to ask you to tell us your whole experience, what it was like when you arrived, how long you stayed there for, what the community was like, and the whole picture.
Um, so the Naya Bingy, I'm a little upset with myself. I am an avid journaler. And I went through my journal from back then looking for stuff. And I apparently did not see fit to write down anything about visiting them. And I am mad at 23-year-old Lisa for it. I do remember that I like some Jamaican guy was with me. He wanted to come along. We took a taxi. It was not easy to find. I had to wear like I had to cover my hair with a scarf. I had a long sleeve dress on and then a floor length skirt underneath. I met there I don't know the technical term for her, but like a high priestess sort of person, like a woman in a position of authority. And she told me how so like for Rastas, the promised land is Ethiopia. That's what they believe. That's like their Israel. That's where they think that they're all gonna end up. And like live a wonderful life. She was telling me how she had been to Ethiopia twice, and she was all about, I'm trying to remember the three words, reparations and repatriation were two of the what was the other one? There was some other word first that also started with an R. Maybe restoration, reparation, repatriation. Reparations, I don't know if that's something that gets talked about in your country at all. But it's like the idea that like we've really fucked over Black people and we should be making a very serious effort to repair that by giving them resources and money and things to even out the playing field, which I 1,000% think we should be doing. And repatriation for them means um, going to Ethiopia. So, like going back to the motherland of Africa, Ethiopia in particular. So she talked about that. Something kind of eerie had happened. So with Jamaican currency, $1,000 bill and $100 bill look very similar. It's like a penny to a US dollar. Like they're not worth a lot, but they're a similar color, those two bills. And I had made a donation and I thought I had given her $100 bill, but it was actually 1,000. and I had needed the 1,000 to get home. So I remember we had said goodbye and like hugged and everything, and we're walking away. And I had like whispered to the guy I was with, like, do you have cash on you? Because I just made a mistake. And next thing I know, she's calling me back and she's like, come back, come back, come back. And then gives my money to me back again. There's no way that she like heard me saying that either. So that was like kind of weird. And that's what sticks out in my memory about visiting the Nyabingi.
What did the community look like in terms of was it an intentional residential community where people were living?
Yeah, they live like a communal life. They're not quite as cloistered as this other sect of Rastafari called the Bobo Dreads, and they like live way up in a hill, and they don't really leave very often. But yeah, they like all lived in the same little, I don't want to say compound, like campus village area. Um, yeah, they all like lived in the same little spot with little houses. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And do you remember what effect that left 23-year-old Lisa with? One that was kind of yearning to learn more about other intentional communities, or one that was kind of just like, oh, that was cool, with the kind of not.
23-year-old Lisa was thrilled. Like thrilled to pieces. Um, my major takeaway was probably now I want to go visit the Bobo Dreads, which I did about a year later. And I had like seen a documentary about them in that same class. Um, but yeah, that's like where it began for me. The like, wow, you can go visit people and you can not believe the same things, but you can still like tell each other about what you believe and look for the similarities and celebrate your differences and so on. Yeah.
We were introduced to one another through journalist and friend of the Cult Vault podcast, Siren Warner. And
Yes.
I wanted to firstly say a big shout out and hello to Siren if you're listening. And secondly, just to ask you the story of how you both met, because I've recently watched some test footage of you and
Yes.
Siren discussing the body, which is, of course, the group that originated in Nikiski that Siren has been accused of being a cult hunter as he
Yes.
exposes the ins and outs of the body.
Which is the most badass thing ever. And can I just say, I've also been watching that footage, and your voice over top of it is just like perfection, just absolutely nailing it. I think it's gorgeous the way that it's turned out. Um, so the way I met Siren is kind of odd. Um, to give it a little bit of context, a few months before he and I made contact, um, a guy who has a lot of power in the comedy community where I live, who like books a lot of the shows and everything. He was like, Lisa, you've done a lot of really incredible things in life. If you ever want to do a one woman show, let me know. And I was above and beyond flattered by that. So he and I had gotten together to talk about what we might do that on. And like we were just like spitballing things around, and I immediately started talking about the Moonies and everything. And he was like, well, is this something you would want to do a show on? And I was like, oh my gosh, you would produce a show for me, like about me visiting cults? Like, is that a thing that could happen? He was like, absolutely. And you should go visit more of them. And I was like, fuck yeah, this is great. So like it becomes established that I'm going to do a one woman show about cults, which I'm still like working on. And the one evening, I just like, this is another eerie thing, kind of like what happened with the priestess at the Nyabingi. Something inside of me that I don't think is necessarily Lisa was like, go on Craigslist, Lisa. Go on Craigslist tonight. I don't know. Does England have Craigslist? Probably not.
We have a thing similar called Gumtree.
Okay, so for those who know what Gumtree is, for those who know what Craigslist is, that's the sort of thing I'm going on. I've not had reason to go on Craigslist for many years, but just something is telling me to go on there that night, and I see an ad for some being asked, like, I need people to write pieces about cults if you've survived a cult or been involved in one in any capacity. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm here for. So I sent an email and was like, hey, I would love to write about cults for you. I've visited this, that, and that, and that, and the other thing. And, you know, I've been to see the Bobo Dreads, and I've fired the Moonies assault rifle, and blah, blah, like all of these ridiculous things that I've done. And it was Siren, and Siren got back to me pretty immediately and was essentially like, I don't think you're real, but you have a very active imagination. And I was like, no, really, I am. And I sent him some pictures from those places and a piece that I had written about the Amish that I'd written for my own personal joy. And he was like, let's do this. So I've been writing pieces for his website ever since, and we correspond quite a bit. And I call him my match made in Heaven's Gate.
That's such a cool story. And I think it's funny that his immediate reaction was like, this can't be true, because you put an ad out on Craigslist and you're like, I'm looking for somebody who has been involved with cults, and you're like, yeah, I've just visited loads, because it's not something you hear every day.
Yeah,
So of course I think the natural reaction would be, I think this person might be stretching the truth.
yeah. But he knows I'm real now. We have never met in person. I'm sure that will happen at some point, but we're both real and it's awesome.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on infiltrating cults. Part 2 and 3 will focus on experiences Lisa has had inside specific groups that are widely considered to be cults. If you would like to find Lisa's writing, you can visit lisavanansdale.wordpress.com or follow the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.